Okay, I think we can start for the sake of time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special 28 for 28 webinar on the topic of assessing climate change in Western Asia. I'm Ridan Al-Saqaf. I'm the economist at the United Nations office in the UAE, and we have a distinguished presentation and engagement for you, starting with a panel led with our colleague Carol Shufani, who's the director of the Arab Center for Climate Change Policies, with commentary from Mirag Al-Jabouri from UNEP, Hisham Abdul Ghani from WMO, and our colleague Francisco Pavarella from the Climate Change Research Network in the UAE. We will have an engaging session. I would like to ask you to share any questions that you have in the chat, and we hope to have an opportunity to discuss your questions and comments and thoughts towards the end of this session. Carol, over to you.
Thank you, Aidan, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you to share some of our work with our regional partners on assessing climate change in Western Asia. I'm just popping up my presentation. Aidan, is it all clear? Is the slideshow working?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to, this might be introductory for some and new for others, just so that when we think about assessing climate change in Western Asia, there's the science-based approach that we all understand and can use to inform further work at the UAE level, in the Gulf, and indeed in the whole entire Arab region. But let's start with the basics. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they released a very important report, their 6th assessment report last year, that talks about impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. This panel, of course, works with experts across the world based on peer-reviewed journals to see what the trends are and what climate change means across different sectors and peoples. So from the observed data sets, we know what we're all aware of, that observed temperatures are increasing, particularly in this middle band across the world. And precipitation is changing. Some areas becoming a bit more, you can see in the darker, and some suffering less precipitation. These are observed findings based on what we have seen in the past up through the 20-year period going to 2014. The IPCC also looks at projections, and that's how we think about going forward. So in their database, they have, which is a very valuable interactive platform, they show what the trends are based on global knowledge on what are the observed data and what are projections. However, as you can see, the way they do their analysis is cut up into different areas. So our region does not allow the Arab region or even the entire Mashreq West Asia region to talk collectively based on the analysis provided by the IPCC. To show this a little bit more specifically, these are the ways that regional analysis is presented by the IPCC. And as you can see, the Gulf has some, Lebanon is in the Med, but Jordan and Syria and Iraq are in another area, Mediterranean, Sahel. Our region is all dissected. So it's very hard for us to have common understandings of what the impacts are on Arab countries in the Western Asia, in the Mashreq, in the Gulf, and even at the country level when we only use global types of analysis. And that is why, and also another point is because the IPCC is drawn on peer-reviewed journals and what is available globally, the confidence that they have for parts of our region is not high. The IPCC does not conduct its own analysis. It takes what's out there. So one of the storylines that come about when we think about climate analysis and using a science-based approach to support our work in the Arab region is that more science, more peer-reviewed journals, more work by our experts in the regions need to be promoted so that we are part of the storyline in the global process. Because this has not been the case, and because we need knowledge that fits the needs of Arab states, we have been working at the request of the Council of Arab Ministers responsible for the environment under the League of Arab States and the Arab Ministerial Water Council under the auspices of ESQA's Arab Center for Climate Change Policies to improve understanding of climate change at the Arab regional level. And we've been doing this for over a decade. Specifically, the innovative aspects that we did was set up something called a domain. So in order to create projections and a science-based approach for understanding climate from Morocco to Oman, from the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates to the headwaters of the Nile, we had to frame where the projections sit in to get a better sense of what's happening in the region and not just extracting data that happens at a higher scale of resolution from global models. So we do regional climate modeling in this program and this initiative joining the UN and LAS systems together. It's called a Regional Initiative for the Assessment of Climate Change Impacts on Water Resources and Socioeconomic Vulnerability in the region, and we use climate modeling to inform several of our work, be it negotiations, adaptation, mitigation, and you can do the same, as has been done by several researchers and governments in the region. So that is why this domain has been framed. And as you can see, it is, again, larger than just Arab states, because you don't only think about climate change at a national boundary context, but you have to think about as a transboundary phenomenon. And transboundary doesn't only mean across land spaces, across countries, but also how pressures from the Indian Ocean or from the Atlantic Ocean or from what's happening even at the headwaters of the Nile are affecting climate phenomenon and water resources and water dependent sectors within Arab states. So framing is one big step that we have to think about when we are setting up a science-based approach for understanding regional climate. The second thing is understanding which scenarios. We had started this work, as I said, back in 2010, and this was when the fifth assessment report was was being issued. So we used initially a set of representative concentration pathways, RCPs, to frame our understanding of climate. There was a high emission scenario that was RCP 8.5. You can see that red curve, and a lower emission, more moderate scenario that hopes for more active mitigation efforts, which is the RCP 4.5 scenario. Why is this important to think about when you look at analysis about climate change? Well, if a country is saying the impacts of an RCP 8.5 scenario are dramatic, and therefore we need to respond to that, well, they should be promoting work on climate ambition and more mitigation at the same time. We can't be saying that there's adaptation projects without globally working together to also achieve the mitigation targets. And that's how come the scenarios help to frame understanding of what happens in a high emissions context or in a more moderate context. And let me show you what the difference is. By the way, we do these for the Arab region at a resolution of about 50 kilometer scale across the Arab regions for the two scenarios. And this is what it comes out with, which is also shown in the poster behind Raidan when he was speaking. So in the low emission scenario, we can see, compared to the reference period, so 1996 to 2005, that temperatures are increasing at the mid-century for this, and I don't know if the pointer will work, there we go. From the reference period, we're increasing about 1 to 2 in the midpoint, and at this low emission scenario, 2 to 3 degrees by the end of the century, if mitigation efforts are pursued. But if it's business as usual, look how much higher climate may increase in the region. Indeed, temperatures across the Arab region might increase by 4.8 degrees Celsius compared to just the beginning of the century. This is not compared to the pre-industrial area, the 1850s. This is compared to the beginning of this century, an increase of 4 to 5. This is dramatic when we think about implications for water availability, food security, heat stress, etc., that we'll be talking about shortly. Go. The other, precipitation is another dimension. Precipitation is more variable because as the heat warms, it affects the climate cycle, and this has different types of effect, whether on oceans or on land. And so precipitation is not always reducing, but as we can see in much of the area, in the brownish area, we are seeing that precipitation is coming down. But you see at the tip around the UAE, around the tip of the Gulf and Oman, we are seeing a bit of increase, and that is signifying also challenges related to extreme climate events, where the volume of water over the course of the year might be increasing because of extreme events, even though the availability over the course of the year remains relatively limited. And that's why extreme events are so important. We look at extreme events as a different way to dissect the information about the climate science available beyond precipitation, beyond temperature, to use indices to see what might be happening in terms of hot days, cold days, tropical nights, dry spells, etc. And it's not a stranger to anyone on this call that while the world thinks that a summer day, a hot day, is above 25 degrees, well, that's, a normal day for us. So we have another indicator to manage a hot day in our region, which are the number of days above 40 degrees Celsius, which no one else in the world really thinks about. But that is a common way of measuring, so we understand actually the increase in heat waves in our region. And this is what it is showing when you think of the outcomes. This is showing that as time progresses, in the low emission scenario, we might get up to 60 extra days of summer days above 40 degrees Celsius, also affecting very much in our region. And if it's at the high emission scenario, this can go up to even 80. So these are findings from the Arab region, which we have been doing and we support across Arab states. But the innovative addition that we've been doing over the last few years with our partners is a Mashriq domain output that creates outputs at a 10-kilometer scale resolution for 2 scenarios as well. We've already finished up the first business as usual fuel development intensive scenario that was released last year. It's openly available and already being used by countries and researchers. And the next set for that more moderate emission scenario is coming out later on this year. There's 6 projections for each of these, 6-member ensembles. That's all available so we can create the science and create the knowledge and generate the analysis that can help ensure that Arab concerns at the national level are science-based, as well as our concerns globally are there. Now, these new models are linked into the approach and the scenarios of the current assessment report number 6, again, that I mentioned before, that were released last year. And these are showing, again, we're using the same types of scenarios, RCP 4.5 and 8.5, but because of the new scenarios, they are linked to additional work on shared socioeconomic pathways. And so we are working on SSP2, which is this middle of the road that links to 4.5, and then the fossil fuel development scenario that links a little bit more to 8.5. So that is why you're seeing the differences here across time. And again, which scenario used shows your optimism or pessimism about how mitigation is going as we move forward on the global climate goal. So what does this mean for the region? Some of the findings, you can see the granularity has improved, and what temperature means for the Mashriq region and for the UAE specifically. We can see that in the Arabian Peninsula, the rate of temperature change is increasing higher than the global average. Already, the global mean previously was higher, with the Arab Peninsula getting higher than 2.2 degrees Celsius, increasing temperatures from the pre-industrial area at the beginning of the last century, while the global mean was only 1.7. And more recently, we see still that the Arabian Peninsula is getting hotter at 1.1 degrees Celsius compared to the global mean of 0.7. So when the world is talking about trying to limit global temperatures well below 2 and hopefully at 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial era, we are already there almost, and we will be by the middle century. You can see with the UAE how much hotter it is getting and which parts of the Emirates are getting warmer as time progresses. Specifically related to temperature on the UAE, the temperatures have been increasing about 2.2 degrees per decade, and that rate will increase further when we think about the scenarios by 2030 as we move forward till the mid-century and end century. So the rate will even be higher, going to 0.6 degrees increase per decade compared to the past. So not only are temperatures increasing, but the rate of increase is growing. We use again this type of information to provide that information on the extreme climate indices. It could be for the number of hot days where we're seeing again a warming in parts. There is a dip here, as was mentioned before, but about 10 to 20 days by mid-century, and getting up to 20 to 40 extra days above 35 degrees Celsius by the middle. This is also linked to humidity. So especially in the Gulf, where there's the coastal communities that we work, while temperatures may increase, and we can see that by using a humidity index, we can see that when air temperature is about 31 degrees and increasing, 60% humidity means that actually it becomes 35 degrees Celsius in the way we feel. And we have a research team here. I call out Marlene Tomasius, who's with us, who's been doing research on humidity and that multiplier effect that changes in temperature has on people. We don't only do this work at the national level or sub-regional level. You can also dissect the information to help work at the basin level or in aquifer systems or in sub-areas or in specific governance. And we can use those different geospatial areas to conduct dialogues with local stakeholders to develop consensus approaches, be it for priority setting, basin level analysis, creation of response measures, and the data is available again for the whole Arab region and specifically also even more so in the Mashriq region, where this data can help a science-based approach for developing this type of analysis at the scale and type of sector that you are looking for. This is, for example, for the Euphrates, and we've done a series of assessments on changes in water availability in the Euphrates basin due to climate change and what that means for agricultural productivity for wheat and other strategic sectors. These types of analysis are also used to inform conversations and inputs with under the framework of the UN framework on climate change and the reporting that has to go. That has to be submitted by countries. For example, the outputs from RICAR that we were presenting has been used by Lebanon in their 4th national communication that was just issued last month. Lebanon and others are also using this type of information to develop projects and plans that can help generate resources for moving forward on climate action. We had a climate finance forum back in September, and some of the modeling outputs were helped to inform some of the projects developed by countries. And we have been working actually with the Swedish government and the FAO, ACSED, and other regional partners to develop watershed climate-proof resilience plans, also with a series of demand-driven consultative approaches with countries to be able to provide a science-based approach for developing these plans and interventions and projects that have the climate rationale for securing funding for climate adaptation. Another dimension, I have still some time, another dimension has to do with extreme events. We are seeing, and it's already been witnessed in the UAE, increased flooding. And as mentioned, even though the volume might be increasing, the problem is the intensity of that volume coming down. And we are seeing that floods are on the rise, for example, in Fallujah. And how Faraja, sorry, and how this is affecting and will continually to be experienced on the tip of the UAE as floods continue to be shown in the summer months and in the winter months, and that's what you can see with the blue showing an increase in runoff in those areas. While flooding is a problem in terms of extreme weather events, so is drought. And again, to recognize the work of our colleagues and the peer-reviewed collection of information that the IPCC gathers, there is an annex to the IPCC Assessment Report 6 outcome that shows droughts happening increasingly across the region. That's why you see that band where we are. And specifically, they are acknowledging that from peer-reviewed work from 2018, that you can see that on the western end of the Arabian Peninsula and also around Dubai, that there will be more frequent droughts experienced through 2050, and that plans should be taken care of as we think about water scarcity and indeed water security. Why is this important when we think about floods and droughts? These are natural disasters that affect people. So we see that these two phenomenon, droughts and floods, are the most frequent that are being experienced in the region. Extreme temperatures and insect infestations are also evident, like the locust that often happens after the rainy periods. The people affected by drought, also quite significant landslides associated with floods, storms, and wildfires are amongst the major problems for the Arab region. The countries most affected are Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Iraq, experiencing these challenges, be it floods and droughts. And you can see UAE has expressed particular interest during its prior presidency of the Security Council that climate security is of concern. So looking at how displacement happens due to these extreme events is important to consider, and which countries are being most affected. However, to be clear, conflict remains the largest reason for displacement in our region. Climate is a factor, especially extreme climate events, but conflict, it has been shown that it remains the most pronounced reason for displacement in the region. The gray is in the map here is caused by natural disasters. The blue is how much displacement is caused by conflict. Unfortunately, that continues to affect us. To wrap up, I wanted to say that we've been talking a lot about the impacts of climate change and direct effects, but this cannot be understood without thinking about vulnerability. And so also under RICAR with our partners, we don't only look at the impacts of climate change, but what it means for adaptive capacity. Because indeed, even if the impacts are harsh, if you're able to deal with them, your ability to be resilient to those effects is higher. If you do not have the resources, then you cannot. So you can see here, while there are impacts regarding water availability in parts of the area, Somalia has absolutely limited adaptive capacity to deal with it. Some countries in the region also have more about adaptive capacity than others. So, for example, up in the Mediterranean, they have effects, but the capacity to deal with these stresses, such as water availability stresses, is higher in some parts of the region. So we have to think about adaptive capacity and not only impacts. And adaptive capacity has to do with the whole socioeconomic ecosystem, knowledge, awareness, infrastructure, institutions, financial and economic resources, and equity. All that goes into thinking about adaptive capacity. And so what we do, again, at various scales of analysis, we do impact chains and geospatial analysis to show what vulnerability is, which is different from impacts. And when we see vulnerability, we see, for example, water availability, vulnerability in the region looks like this by mid-century. And you see the southern part of Sudan, the tip of the Arabian Gulf, the eastern part of the western part of Saudi Arabia, and even dots around UAE and Oman affected. It will even get worse in a lot of parts by the end of the century. You see it getting redder. Water availability is one story. So is water available for crops? Look what happens regarding the ability of the agricultural system to sustain this, all the red happening in those, particularly in the least developed countries. And then what it means for agricultural employment, that is very dramatic also. And these are the types of analysis that go beyond, again, just impacts, but what it means for vulnerability and then creating measures for resilience. We do this at the country level. We've been working with Jordan, for example, completing a vulnerability assessment and a drought assessment. And this has helped to inform the identification of projects through our ESCWA's Climate SDG Debt Swap Initiative that is trying to find resources, innovative financing to respond to these climate change challenges. So this is the science that is informing the selection of projects for financing. We have to remember, I know it's not the topic of this session, but financing is fundamental. We are not getting the needed resources we need in the Arab region to meet our climate finance needs. And not only that, the financing funds that we get, 1/3 is only going to adaptation. The other 2/3 are going for mitigation, which has cost recovery. This is dramatic because when we think of climate adaptation, we think of impacts on livelihoods. We think about climate security. We need funds for adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and not things that can be anyhow achieved through cost recovery and the private sector engagement. Both are important, again, mitigation and adaptation, but more resources are needed for adaptation, and using the science approach like RICAR and other projections can get us there. And finally, this is a whole ecosystem. This information can inform a whole effort at climate mainstreaming across the governance cycle that requires integrated planning, inclusive budgeting, and informed decision-making. All the data shared is available on our regional knowledge hub with our dozens of partner engaging and a whole list of peer-reviewed journal articles where people have used the data to prepare other articles and reports. That's available at the Knowledge Hub. You can also access the data through the visualizations for the Arab Domain Hub, which is hosted with our partners at FAO, or the one that we just launched last year for the Mashrek domain, where you can go and see the indicators you want. Also, don't hesitate to ask, and we can provide you tailored data sets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that enlightening presentation. I really appreciate the work that you're doing with the team, with Ricard, with your partners. And it's always essential that we base our policy, we base our knowledge and thinking on science, on what do we know about the impact and what the consequences that can potentially have on our well-being, on biodiversity on ground, on sea, on infrastructure and other related areas. I'd like to invite our colleague Mira Al-Jabouri from UNEP to share with us some insights based on this discussion on assessing climate change, but also some of the work that UNEP has been leading. Mira, over to you.
Thank you, Raidan, and thank you, Carol. The presentation you had was really interesting. A lot of information there, so thank you. Given the time, I would love to talk about the two tools that we have at UNEP that we believe that is going to be very, very important for you. It's not new. It's it's been out there, but I think they provide real good information and insight. So let me share my screen. And let me know if you can see it, please.
We can't see it.
Can you see my screen? Okay. So today I want to talk about Informia and DART. So I'll start with Informia. Basically, Informia is a tool that is co-chaired by UNEP and CITES. Informia is basically an online knowledge management platform that provides a lot of information and insight on key topics related to the multilateral environmental agreements. It provides the necessary information that you need for you to kind of track, understand, and also know what it's all about and what's happening with it. So the initiative, like I said, it's co-chaired by UNEP and CITES, but it also brings together about 22 MEAs that's hosted by 5 different UN organizations and IUCN. It was generously funded by the European Union. And this comes as part of the mandate of UNEP, which is to provide an access to knowledge and information by integrating web-based tools and other knowledge management, and making it also available to key or main stakeholders. So there, I put the link there, and I'm not, depending on the time, we can probably go through it very quickly. But I wanted to kind of walk through the main parts of Informia, just to kind of give you an example of what you can do. So the main part, Raidan, can I go through the tool in itself? It's probably easier.
Yes,
to
go
give
ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
Just give me 1 second. I think it's probably easier to go through a live demo of it rather than doing it in a presentation. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is basically the Informia. It's easy to access, public, open access. You don't need to create a username, password. It's just, you type in the link right there, informia.org, and you select the English language. So as you can see, you can first search by any keyword. You can type whatever keyword that you would like to search upon, and the tool would smartly give you that information. You can also access it by the different topics. So you can, for example, go to climate change and atmosphere. When you click on it, you will see all of the different MEAs that are related to climate change and atmosphere. You can also access it by, if you go through treaties, you can access it, like I said, by the topic. You can also access it by the region, and you can access the global ones. When you access one, I'm gonna select, for example, the UNFCCC. When you go into a certain MEA, you will see the different protocols. You'll see the treaty, the decisions, the parties, what are the reports, all of the different documents, the contact hub. So basically, you will find out all of the different information that you need related to this MEA. You can also access it by party. So if you click on party, you will see all of the different countries. Let's scroll down, for example, to UAE. And then if you click on the country, you will see all of the different MEAs that this country is a part of. So if you go through, for example, the status, party status here, you will see the different treaties, and if they have signed it, if there's a ratification, what's the status, when did they sign, all of these different information. You will see the different action plans. You will see the different national reports, and it will give you access to all of this. Also, a really important one is the law and cases, because this gives you by region and by country the different laws of the country, excuse me, and the strategies. I apologize. There's also there a calendar of events. So if you click on it, you will be able, by the different treaties, to access whatever events that's happening, like the different COPs, the different activities that are happening. Also, I think this is one of my favorite parts of it is the glossary, because we often deal with different terms and language. And here, this gives you access to all of these different. And also the final one is the goals. So if you can access it by, for example, SDGs or the IG targets. And when you click on it, it links it to the different MEAs. So for example, if I go here, you see how it's linking that SDG to the different MEAs. Any questions so far before I move forward, or are we opening the floor right now for questions?
I think we asked any questions to be posted on the chat, and we will discuss all the questions posted at the end of the session. So,
okay. So as you can see, it's very easy, very user-friendly. You can access it publicly, and it gives you a lot of the different information. It gives it to you in a really easy way. I don't believe there is a lot of complexity into it, but it's a very important and powerful tool that I would recommend all of you to visit and make a use of it. The other tool that I wanted to talk about is the DART, and here I wanted to, let me get back to my presentation. So the other tool that we also linked to the Informia is a tool called DART, which is the data reporting tool for the MEAs. Now, this is mainly focusing on the biodiversity, but it also provides a really good way to report the information and the data as it relates to the MEAs. So this slide really shows you how this works. So basically, what you do while you put together, the different information that you want to report on, such as indicators, links, files, images, different data points. The tool itself links it to a certain national target that you have within the country, and then it goes back into distributing it into the different national reports. Like it goes back into the targets, the different MEAs. So it's a tool that provides you the ease of reporting. So rather than you go individually and report into each one, you can use this tool and report one time for all of the different MEAs and the different information. So as you can see, it's a very smart tool that can link everything together and then distributes the information based on the different MEAs. There's also a lot of information available if you access this user guide.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mirag. It's always a treasure trove.
I don't know what happened, but I got
It's
a
all
really
right.
nasty cough.
صحة
I
عزيزة.
apologize for anything, and let me know if you have any further question.
All right. Thank you, Mirag. It's always interesting to look at the different tools because this is a complex and an increasingly serious area of work, and tools of this nature can be very useful. Our next commentator is our colleague Hisham Musa from World Meteorological Organization. Hisham, you have the floor.
Thank you, Radian, for inviting me, and thanks, Carol, for the excellent presentation.
Perhaps you can open your camera. We can't see you.
Is it necessary?
Well, it helps to make eye contact virtually.
No, it's okay. So I will focus on my comment and inputs on the role of WMO and its members in securing the climate data information and the climate services, which are critical for climate developing the climate change adaptation and mitigation actions. As you are aware, the weather, climate, and water cycles know no national boundary, as Carol mentioned earlier. Therefore, the international cooperation at the global scale is essential to implement the Earth system approach for development of the meteorology, climatology, and operational hydrology and other environmental services, and to reap the benefit from their application. And on that track, WMO provides the framework for such international cooperation. As a specialized agency of the United Nations, WMO is dedicated to international cooperation and coordination on the state of behavior of the Earth's atmosphere, its interaction with the land, ocean, weather, and the climate it produced, and the resulting distribution of water resources. How WMO do that? Through its technical commissions, programs, project, regional offices, as well as synergetic and private-public partnership. WMO facilitate and coordinate the Earth system approach to gathering and free exchange of observation, promoting the integration of research and the development and delivery of service, the area of weather and the climate and water. Within its mandate, in the area of the weather and the climate, WMO focuses on mainly different aspects of issues from observation, information exchange, research to weather forecasting, early warning, capacity development, monitoring of the greenhouse gases to application services, and much, much more. The National Meteorological Hydrological Service are recognized in the Convention of the WMO as a fundamental part of the national infrastructure and they play an important role in supporting vital function of the governments. That's why inadequate infrastructure and limited human resources in some countries, especially on the developing and least developed country, are among the factors that limit their capacity to take advantage of the advances in science and the technology to improve their service. The National Meteorological Services actually undertake active activity directed at improving our understanding of the weather, climate, and hydrological cycle over both land and sea, undertaking monitoring to the weather, climate, and water, and provide forecast and provide weather, climate, water, and other services to range of the users to respond to relevant national, regional, and the global needs. The National Meteorological Services play a central role in the global framework for climate services at the national, regional, and also global level. They engage with the other organizations at different level, providing coordination capacity for establishing and providing operational climate services at national level. WMO here also assists the national meteorological services, especially those in developing country and the least development country in their effort to contribute in the most effective manner to the national development and becomes a full partner in the global cooperative effort. The WMO Convention reaffirmed the importance of the National Meteorological and Hydrological Service in observing and understanding the weather and the climate related services, particularly related to the protection of life and the property, safeguard of environment, contributing to sustainable development, promoting long-term observation, collection of meteorological, hydrological data and information, promotion of capacity development, meeting the international commitment, and contributing to the international cooperation. On the observation and the data side, our understanding of the Earth's climate is rooted in the observation of the atmosphere, ocean, land surface, including the hydrological carbon cycle and the cryosphere. Using weather observations that are made regularly over a period of time, we can quantify long-term average conditions and gain insight into the area climate. Climatologists use the climate norms for 30 years historical average on various like temperature and the precipitation to have for example, the magnitude of the current heat wave or rainstorm into historical context. In areas where the direct observation are sparse, observation are combined with the model through reanalysis to arrive at numerical description of the recent climate reanalysis data are used for monitoring climate change as well as for research, education, and climate application. On the monitoring side and the modeling and the forecasting, the modeling shorter term climate condition and the prediction, what is the next season will bring or how our climate will change in the coming years is critical for sustainable development and is an important component for the climate adaptation and the climate services. Therefore, WMO collaborate with its member to issue the global seasonal prediction, such as related to El Nino, La Nina phenomena, global seasonal climate update to help the different sectors make climate smart decision. So WMO.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hisham. For the sake of time, maybe I'm sorry to cut you there.
No, that's
I can't
fine.
emphasize enough the centrality of the work of WMO in relation to the national data for dealing with your National Meteorological Organization partners. Every day, every once in a while, we hear this year we broke 7 records in the UAE, we broke 10 records in the UAE. We had the 3 hottest days consecutively. So we keep hearing these numbers reminding us of the gravity of the situation. So thank you very much for your work, and we look forward to learning a little more about that. Looking forward to your next report next April on the world status.
Yeah.
I give now the floor to our colleague, Dr. Francisco Paparella from the Climate Change Research Network. Dr. Francisco, you have the floor.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear and see you.
Okay, perfect. I will just very briefly give some considerations. I would like to thank the previous speakers for their excellent point. In particular, both Carol and Mirak Carol specifically made an excellent point on the need of regional climate model. I would say, as a climate scientist, that we have had enormous progresses in terms of modeling the global climate change. But what we really need to address now is what is going to happen at the regional and local scales. And the reason is because any mitigation or adaptation activity essentially is going to happen at the regional and local scales, even down to the level of city scale. And in order to do that, global models are of limited help. Carol mentioned that, but it may be a very useful exercise for anyone to go on the IPCC site and look at, there is a beautiful web application that allows to look at the output of the various CMIP6 models. These are the global models on top of which the IPCC report is built. And if we look at the Arabian Peninsula, we see that the various models disagree strongly in some respects, in particular in precipitation. Some models project, for the same socioeconomic scenario, some models project a reduction in precipitation of up to 25%. Some models project an increase in precipitation almost at 200%, and everything in between. You can find models that say anything in between these two extremes. Therefore, the conclusion is that if we are interested in answering this sort of questions, what is going to be the precipitation in the future, global models are not going to help us. We need regional models, but regional models are fraught with a lot of other questions. In the chat, we can read a very important issue. If we are interested in modeling river discharge, we need to extend our regional models in order to include the hydrological sources of the rivers that we are interested in. So just to make an example, if we are interested in the Nile, we need to model a big chunk of Africa. And this, in some sense, may defeat the purpose, because the goal of a regional model would be to focus on a very limited space region. So another way around, and here I'm not criticizing what Ricard is trying to do. This is absolutely necessary, absolutely great. But from a scientific point of view, we also need to take another path, which is parallel, the path that I would call the process study regional climate model. So regional climate model whose goal is not that of producing scenarios that then can inform policy directly, but regional climate models that investigates the various regional and local feedbacks, that investigate processes. And let me give you an example. One of the recent works that my group at New York University, Abu Dhabi has done is unveiling the link between coral bleaching and wind, and summer wind in particular. In summers like 2013, when there have been strong Shamal winds along the Gulf, across the Gulf, corals had not had any problems and water temperature have been very contained. But in 2017, there was a slack of Shamal wind during the summer, and this produced an extreme increase in water temperature. So what we found is that in the energy budget of the water column, in the summer, the latent heat component is by far, latent heat is the evaporative cooling, is by far the dominant component. And so the more wind we have, the cooler is going to stay the water during the summer. And this comes with a lot of consequences. We focused on coral bleaching, but this, for example, has consequences also for fish farming. So now the question is, what kind of processes affect the Shamal wind? Can we make scenarios in which we create models that in which Shamal wind does something or something else, and see what happens at the regional and local scale? Another example, again, involves rain. In the United Arab Emirates, as we have seen, we don't have much rain, but in particular, it rains in the winter. Essentially, the amount of rainfall during the summer can be well approximated to zero. It's not exactly zero, but can be well approximated to zero. But if you move somewhere else, for example, in Yemen, a fair fraction of, not only it rains a lot more in Yemen than in the United Arab Emirates, but a fair fraction of that rainfall occurs in the summer. And the reason is that that rain is essentially monsoonal rain, is the extreme fringe of the monsoonal rain. Now, this summer, curiously, we have had in the United Arab Emirates quite a few strong rainstorms. And that was exceptional, I would say. So the question is, what is going to be the response to a shifting monsoon of this region. And this again is another process study where one can do sort of what if scenarios, a bit like people do in socioeconomic scenarios. What if the emissions are such and such? So we could try to do what ifs from the physical point of view. What if the monsoon shifts northward or westward? And these sort of questions, without trying to extend the models to encompass the entire Indian Ocean or even more, because then again that would defeat the purpose of having a regional model. And in fact, I would say that the end goal of this exercise would be to downscale down to the city scale and then assess the vulnerability or adaptability of the city infrastructure to extreme events, be them extreme rainfalls or extreme heat or dust storms. And then let me finish with a final idea, which is in this region, we really need observational data. And we heard from Hesham the wonderful work that WMO is doing. That is definitely important, but we need more. Many people, in order to validate the model or produce initial conditions for the models or to produce hindcast with the models, rely on satellite data or on reanalysis, which essentially means models, which is essentially all that we can do right now. But we need more ground truth data, a lot more than what is available. And this data should be publicly available. In particular, because a lot of the satellite data, remote sensed data, for example, I'm thinking about ground level humidity. Well, those numbers really came out from radiometric models. And these radiometric models, because the satellite doesn't really have an hygrometer, it doesn't really measure the humidity. It measures some radiation, and then from this radiation infers a number that we assume to be representative of that of humidity or temperature or salinity or any other quantity that may be measured by satellite. So all these radiometric models need to be calibrated from ground truth. And the problem is that there is a lot of ground truth in Europe for the conditions of Europe, for the United States, from any other highly densely populated place in the world. There is very little ground truth for the Arabian Peninsula. And I face this difficulty every day because, for example, I'm more interested in the oceanography side of things. If we want to know the sea surface temperature, the salinity of the Gulf from satellite observations, these data always come with extreme uncertainty because the optical properties of the Gulf are quite, which is a shallow sea with a lot of phytoplankton, with a lot of sediment in suspension. These optical properties are completely different from those of the open ocean, where typically those radiometric models are calibrated. So we need more ground truth. We need better calibration of the satellite data. And we need, as Hesham was saying, to collect this data not occasionally, but systematically for the long run, because only the observation can tell us really if our model were successful, what really are the changes, and essentially we can really inform us about the changes that are happening. And I think I can stop here.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco. I think we need another hour to discuss your intervention alone along these lines. And I think looking at the questions and looking at the discussions that we've had, the goal behind this session was to help us assess and make sense of the different changes in climate and the climate of the region. The standard 101 way of looking at historical trends and trying to make projections towards the future based on what we know, and based on some other factors like the RCPs, 8.5, 4.5, and other measures. But there is also a lot of discussion in terms of the validity of these questions. Were the assumptions that we made 10 years ago, were they valid for those 10 years that we just passed? Are they valid today? And what are some of the key parameters? Some questions say that 8.5 is unlikely. Even if you burn all the coal in the world, it's very unlikely that you'll achieve 8.5. But other scenarios say it's not about the degree or about the RCP, but it's also about how the different factors interplay. What you mentioned about the north winds and the changing monsoon, does that mean that we're likely to have a lot more rains coming to this region, and what consequences that would have for our lifestyles, and when, and the quantity, and the time, and also the biodiversity, and the changes, and the potential change in the biodiversity. And it's very volatile. In the business world, they have this acumen, this acronym VUCA, which talks about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in terms of we don't know what we don't know. But at least there should be some efforts that we know whatever the scenario is, we're not really going in the best direction. So just a quick reflection on the interventions. And I noted a couple of questions were already answered in the comments, but maybe perhaps we can touch on two quick points. The first point was raised perhaps to Mirag in relation to the sources of the information that Informia aggregates. I understand it's an aggregator that captures data that was posted at FAO and other custodians of other processes, but perhaps Mirag, if you're with us, you can shed some light on that. And I also see there is also a question for Carol in relation to nature-based solutions and how can the projections help link along these lines. So Carol, Mirag, over to you.
Shall I step in, or is he on? There we go. Mira, go ahead. Hope your voice works.
Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
I apologize for I had I don't know, I have some allergies and it just caught. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, Aidan?
There was a question in terms of how updated is Informia. Is it the update itself? Are there periodical updates, or does it rely on having countries submit their updates and their submissions to the custodians of the different conventions, and therefore?
Yeah, it's a combination of obviously there are parts that are pretty good in terms of updates, especially like the events, the different areas, the signatures of the different countries. But there are part of the information that are related to the countries. That obviously is dependent on the countries to update, and this is part of our work that we usually try to push the countries into updating this information, because the more information you report, the better the tool is going to be. So it's a mix, but I would say it's pretty good. There's a good rate of update into both tools, but obviously it can always be enhanced.
Thank you, Carol.
On the nature-based, I think Noor just saw the comment I posted. I just wanted to clarify that at ESQA, we work with RICAR through, again, multi-agency initiative, founding partners since 2010 and new partners coming on board. But RICAR is a regional initiative that deals with the science base to inform our work. Our work on climate change at ESQA is under the Arab Center for Climate Change Policies, and it's a multi-sector, things like nature-based solutions, biodiversity, mitigation, carbon capture, negotiations, a very big program on supporting Arab states on climate change negotiations. All that is under the framework of the center. I was just very pleased to share with you the work of RICAR that we do again with our colleagues, because this provides a science base where we can enhance knowledge about the Arab region, help inform and direct hotspots that work like Francesco is doing on coastlines and oceans, providing a frame that is region specific that we can use and allow for conversations, not only at the local level, but also between the countries that are not getting well represented in the global analysis that is out there. And we hope that you'll be able to use it, ricar.org.
Thank you, Carol. I think it's a good starting point for us to understand more about the dynamics, and then we can always explore further reading and further work across the board. So if there are no other comments from our presenters and commentators, I would like to thank you everyone for joining us. Be with us next week for the next 28 for 28, every Wednesday, 2 p.m. UAE time. Next week's session is on green jobs which is an exciting session with important interventions telling us about the opportunities that sustainable lifestyles and sustainable economies would give us. Thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you for the invitation, Aidan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raidan. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.